Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and heterofatalist editor of the American Mind. I am joined this week by the OG crew, publisher and president Ryan Williams and managing editor Mike Sabo. And I don't think I can preview our topics this week any better than just to read to you all a text message from noted dad rock enthusiast Mike Sabo that ended up in my group chat feed just this morning. Quote, "Yeah, the big balls topic is good because there's so many angles." So, dear listener, you have the forward this week.
To quote Archer, phrasing, Mike, phrasing.
There's got to be a better way to say that. So having given you that little teaser, we're going to make you wait and suffer through, or perhaps romp through a little gerrymandering story. We promise you'll like it. It's going to be really fun. Actually, this is, to me, a really delightful and highly American little political drama. You may have heard that the Texas legislature is moving to redistrict, which otherwise known as to gerrymander, that is to redraw the lines of their electoral map to gain another 5 easy red congressional seats in advance of the midterm. It seems pretty widely agreed that this was done at Trump's prompting and request. It doesn't seem, who does want to lose a midterm, but especially Donald Trump doesn't want to be hamstrung by another hashtag resistance with political teeth. This has been greeted, perhaps predictably, by Democrats not only in Texas, but across the country with a kind of catastrophic, apocalyptic wailing and gnashing of teeth. In Texas, the Democrats have done something that I didn't know they could do, which is they've just left. They just kind of skipped town and went to Illinois, which broke quorum, meaning it stalled the vote so that they couldn't push this through in a bold and daring act of political protest, standing on the principles that have defined the Democrat Party for a whole 5 minutes since this news story was announced. Before that, however, it's been noted that Democrats, gerrymandering is something that has been a both sides thing for literally the whole history of the country, but arguably it's the Democrats that have been really egregious about it, among other places in Illinois, where the Texas Democrats have fled. Trump made a comment on this. He said, in Illinois, what's happened is terrible what they're doing. And you'll notice they go to Illinois for safety, but that's all gerrymandered. California is gerrymandered. We should have many more seats in Congress in California. It's all gerrymandered. There's some truth to this, so far as I can tell. California is one of the many states that is gerrymandered to the gills in favor of Democrats. They have a 43-9 Democratic delegation with only 58.4% of the vote. Illinois is pretty close to that with 14-3 from 52.8% of the vote. Nevertheless, of course, they persisted. This has not stopped Texas Democrats from making a lot of noise about their brave gesture of defiance and resistance, nor has it stopped New York Governor Kathy Hochul or California Governor Gavin Newsom from announcing that all's fair in love and war, and they must now retaliate. Newsom needs a state ballot initiative, I believe, to do this because of how California's system works. But Hochul was asked by a reporter, do you think the independent redistricting commission should be disbanded? That is to say, in New York, the way that they do this is ostensibly designed to keep people from redrawing the map on partisan lines. The reporter asks, should we give that up and drop the pretense? She says, yes, I'm tired of fighting this fight with my hand tied behind my back. So there's a noise going on now of a kind of national gerrymandering war and an escalation in that war because of Trump's involvement here. But one question I have, among others, is if the Democrats make good on their threat to retaliate, how much more can they do that they haven't already done? I mean, aren't their states already sort of hyper partisan and drawn with squiggles all over the map? Or could this in fact get uglier than it already is? And do you think that the Texas thing is gonna work in Trump's favor?
I think the answer to your last question is yes. That's why they left. So they're delaying the inevitable. The somewhat unprecedented nature of it is that this usually occurs after census. The census is taken every 10 years. And so the part of the complaint from Democrats is that this is, a wholly unprecedented threat to democracy because it's outside the normal 10-year census cycle. I haven't heard the argument made yet, and I don't think it would be made somewhat disingenuously given the circumstances of this. Trump asked for it. Texas is happy to oblige. But what Republicans could say, among other things, is what you already said, Spencer, which is, come on now. There's a lot more juice left in the squeeze for Republicans, given the history of Democrats' shamelessness and gerrymandering, at least in the post-war era, compared to Republicans. I think that's pretty much true. I stand by that. And also, Republicans could say, well, look, the last census we tried to fix at the national level by making it only count citizens. And there's a widespread thought around Republican circles, and not just sort of purely partisan MAGA cheerleading, that the 2020 census undercounted Republicans to the tune of probably 10, maybe 12 congressional seats, and thus electoral college votes as well. So the Republicans could shoot back and say, look, we're just righting the wrong of the 2020 census, which the courts prevented us from making more unbiased and more representative of actual populations and actual districts in our favor, but it would have been in their favor legitimately. That's the claim. So I hope someone makes that argument too. The most hilarious part was, I think, Massachusetts. The governor said, this cannot stand. We need to act in kind, but they don't really have any more Democrat seats to gerrymander. So
they're
they're
literally out of Democrat districts.
Oh, here's an obscure comedy, Wayans brother comedy reference for you. It's like, Damon Wayans was in this great movie called, well, great, people know what I mean by great, called Major Payne. And at a certain point, he gets called into this commanding officer's office, and he said, "I'm sorry, Major, we don't have anything left for you to do." And he says, "There's got to be somebody left that needs some killing." "I'm sorry, Major, you've killed them all. I'm sorry, Dems, you've gerrymandered them all."
Yeah. I mean, that census argument is really a good one and totally legitimate, and not actually partisan or Trumpian. I saw the National Review editors put it in an editorial, but I haven't seen actual elected Republicans
Right.
make it. I will throw out, though, a free branding idea based on your description of what they're trying to do to the census. And anybody from the administration that's listening, just pick this up. Only citizens. It's worked for porn stars. It can work for politicians. They're basically the same kind of people.
Only citizens, yeah. That's what they tried in 2020, but it was a Roberts court ruling. It was a Roberts opinion, I think. And they said, I think the argument was it didn't properly go through notice and comment to revise the census revision, or there was some procedural error, which was one of the disappointments of the Roberts court in previous iterations. It's gotten a little better, but I don't think they've taken back up this question. It's all wrapped up. Also, the gerrymandering in the United States post-civil rights era is also particularly weird, and looks weirder than it might otherwise look because of the long-standing alleged racial equality representation demands of the Voting Rights Act. So that complicates all of this as well. And the court is poised to revisit that and maybe overturn what the court has signaled repeatedly, Congress's inability to fix this weird VRA sort of precedential requirement through the twists and turns of liberal jurisprudence over the last 50 years, of basically requiring specific kind of racially gerrymandered districts in order to give minority voices their proper amount of seats, meaning you have to create a black enough or a minority enough congressional district rather than leaving the minorities dispersed throughout a bunch of other districts where they're outnumbered by non-minorities. Anyway, it's a long twisted tale going back to late 60s and 70s jurisprudence. So a lot to chew over. You mentioned, I'll just say one last thing too, Spencer. As a longtime Californian now, recently former Californian, at the time, I forget when they basically passed into law through constitutional amendment, through referendum or a ballot initiative. It was a referendum constitutional amendment to have a redistricting commission. And of course, the commissions are touted as this great bipartisan neutral drawer of district lines. But as we all noted at the time, and it's the case almost everywhere, other states you mentioned as well, these allegedly nonpartisan redistricting commissions are always stacked, especially in blue states, with the home team for blue states. So they have the outward appearance of nonpartisanship, but they get a lot of the same results, California being a case in point.
And that's good, Ryan, that you bring up the nonpartisan kind of, commissioning coalitions that Democrats are always talking about that we should get it out of the politicians' hands and go to, supposedly the neutral experts. Just read your Woodrow Wilson. We know what that actually means. They're experts, obviously. I worked in the Ohio legislature in early 2010s and saw that basically firsthand. The Republicans created the districts. Obviously, it favored the Republicans. Democrats came out and said, oh, we need some independent commission to, stop all this politicization. And of course, that would have just, under cover of, supposed neutrality, that would have just been its own kind of politicization of the map, obviously in their favor. So, this whole gerrymandering thing, I mean, it's been just throughout American history. I think, obviously, I think it's gotten worse in the 1960s. And just to give kind of a little bit of history, so Elbridge Gerry, who was a founding father, vice president, governor of Massachusetts, that's kind of where this term comes from. He signed off on basically like a district designated to guarantee a seat for the precursor of today's Democratic Party. And it kind of resembled kind of a very odd shape. So people kind of looked at that and thought, okay, there's something weird going on here. Obviously, he's kind of carving it up to help his own party. But, even that, I mean, that absolutely pales in comparison to what's going on today. Mary Catherine Ham on X looked at, and this is insane. I mean, I thought Illinois' 13th district was bad, and it is. North Carolina's 12th congressional district is insane. I mean, it is just goes all the way across the state and, hits Charlotte, hits some of the big Winston-Salem, hits some of the big cities, and it just snakes throughout the entire state. It is just, I mean, you look at that and it's very clear what happened there.
Yeah, it looks like an anorexic amoeba, that's almost broken apart, but connected by some threads along highways.
Totally.
Stitched together the proper constituencies. Yeah.
It's so obvious. I mean, again, Illinois' 13th, is very, very strange how that's drawn. And I think, Spencer, you're right that this is clearly cutting out Republicans. I think in California, Republicans constituted about 40% of the congressional vote. This was in 2024. They received about 17% of the House seats. 17 blue states across the country. Democrats won 56% of the popular House vote, but secured 143 of the 185 House seats. That's 77%. This is Jonathan Turley. He's just putting together on his website some facts, just going through this. And then you really have also attached to this kind of thing some insanely bad actors on the Democratic side. I mean, you have Mark Elias, who's trying to kind of raise outrage, obviously gather donations, that kind of thing. But I mean, this guy has a whole history, obviously being anti-Trump with the Steele dossier and Russiagate. I think he actually tried to do some gerrymandering himself, even in Maryland, or filed in support of gerrymandering there, that a court later found that violated Maryland law, state constitution's equal protection, free speech, free elections clauses. So, I mean, you have some insanely bad actors on the one side, I think, especially, who, again, under the cover of neutrality, under the cover of, this is our democracy, I mean, clearly trying to tilt things totally in their favor.
Do you guys think, given what you've just ably outlined, Mike, I've seen some people arguing that this is only going to get worse as the competition escalates and as data collection and AI computer analysis gets more sophisticated, you're going to be able to do this with greater precision. Now, if that's not the case in the US Census, I wonder whether it's actually going to be harder than we think to do really high-tech gerrymandering. But let's take it kind of for granted, for the sake of argument, that gerrymandering, if nothing changes, if these shadows remain unaltered by the present, then we're just on a trajectory to kind of gerrymander ourselves into oblivion. I'm seeing some people say, well, then we should just find some way of basically preventing it altogether. Either Congress or the Supreme Court should make this illegal somehow. And then I'm seeing others saying, no, actually, this is an inherent part of our system, much as Madison says about liberty. It's like fire. It's like oxygen to fire. You shouldn't outlaw breathing just because it might set things on fire. And we're going to have to find some way of basically negotiating and returning to a good faith means of drawing these districts, because it's always going to be political. Or I guess option 3, it's always going to be political. And so it's always just inevitably going to reflect the political biases and partisan opinions of the people in power. So that there's actually nothing to see here and get over it. Where do you guys fall on that?
Yeah, I am. Well, you could. I mean, I think Jefferson's original plan was a kind of grid system across the states to make this equitable, or at least have the semblance of non-bias. The problem is, and maybe this will be fixed with the court modifying its longstanding but acknowledgedly flawed character of this jurisprudence that it's acknowledged over the last 50 years. But currently, under standing precedent under the Voting Rights Act, to do a grid system would be illegal and a violation of civil rights. So there's that standing in the way. I suppose you could have a good government movement that would spread across the states and impose something like a real neutral system, which would not be a redistricting commission stacked with people who are allegedly, I guess the best you could do on a truly as close to non-bias as possible redistricting commission would be to have it be half Republicans and half Democrats, but it never really works out that way, and might just lead to gridlock. So you have the same problem you encounter in a lot of these federal commissions, which have to have, depending on which president is in power, they have an odd number of members so that they don't deadlock all the time. So they have, it has to have 7 members so that they can have a 4-3 override for decisions. So you could have the good government movement spread across the states, but yeah, until we fix the Voting Rights Act and how it's been interpreted, it would be per se unconstitutional, at least according to Supreme Court precedent. So I don't know. It's clear that it's always been political, the drawing of district lines. And so you just got to fight it out in politics. I guess if we could truly have a neutral grid-like system, I'd be, I guess, in favor of it. The question is, how much does the public really care about this? Is there any incentive to initiate and carry forward some good government redistricting mission that would carry the popular imagination across the several states? I'm count me as pretty skeptical.
I think I'm definitely skeptical too of that, just that people, are really kind of that involved, that they even know, kind of the crazy districts that are even there presently, I think. I mean, some of this was even news to me, seeing what was going on in North Carolina and how that district was drawn. Illinois, that's not a shock at all. Land of Obama. So, Pritzker and everything going on there, and Chicago going through mayor after mayor after mayor. So, corruption in Illinois, that is not surprising in the least at all. I'm just kind of skeptical too. I think really what might change is just with the population changes starting in COVID in 2020, California, I think they might end up starting to lose some seats, say in the next census, and some other states too. There are some liberal strongholds. It matters, I guess, how many seats they lose. If it's 2, if it's 3, if it's 4, if it's possibly even more than that, you could start seeing possibly Democrats being, just backed into this just for their own self-preservation. So I think
there's a future. There's a time. There's clock on a lot of this because of how people are flooding out of red state or blue states rather.
Right. So it just really depends on how fast that happens. Whether it's 2030, whether it's 2040. But it's possible. But just kind of knowing the bent of human nature and where our politics are at, I would be doubtful that would happen independent of something, cataclysmic that the Democrats are seeing that they really want to make a change.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. The thing that alarms me about this is not so much that there's chicanery and skullduggery and people kind of arm wrestling over who gets to draw the lines. That just seems, I don't know how exactly, but it feels like if you outlawed it in one way, it would come back in some other form. So that part's not alarming to me. The tedious part is the histrionics and the hypocrisy of just constantly acting as if this has never happened before and treating the public like they're stupid. And of course, some portion of the public, I'm sorry to inform you, are stupid. But most people that follow politics at all, I think, are kind of, we've been through so many of these that we're a bit unfazed and unimpressed by the grandstanding and the theatrics. So with that, last week we brought you mankeeping. This week we bring you heterofatalism. It's starting to become a confected gender war term once a week. We're just keeping you abreast of important developments in academia here at the American Mind podcast. But we did actually want to talk about this pair of articles when we did the mankeeping topic, which, if you will recall, was a journalist or an opinion writer complaining about how women have to be nice to their boyfriends, basically. And the reality that men don't have a lot of in-person friendships, and spouses are stepping in to fill that gap. When we talked about that, I mentioned that this is part of what seems to be a series now of pieces that the Times is running almost exclusively by women about men. And it seems in turn to be a response to the kind of 2024 moment when everyone realized, oh, actually, like men are not so happy about having been made into a national hate object for 20, 30, 40 plus years. And maybe we ought to do some soul searching or inspection about this. And what they seem to have decided to do is tap a bunch of ladies that grew up watching Sex in the City and now think they live in Girls, and have them just write like incredibly lengthy essay think pieces on everything that's going wrong with men. The latest installment in this is The Trouble with Wanting Men by, I think it's Jean, or I suppose it's not John, but Jean Garnett. Where to begin with this? As I have to say, I found this an absolutely propulsive read. I couldn't stop pouring through it because each paragraph catapults you into like yet more derangement than the last. And I really do mean it when I say, with the girls of the Red Scare podcast, that Carrie Bradshaw and her consequences have been a disaster for one half of the human race. Like this is kind of wannabe, like I'm a hip girl in New York writing about my dating life. And the thing that she's observing is that all these men have basically become fluent in therapy speak, but they're just translating into therapy speak all of their previous fear of commitment, disinterest in long-term relationships. And the footnote here that is not included is disinterest in long-term relationships with this author. And I feel that that's an important point, because one of the things that we discover progressively as we go along is that the subtitle of this article ought to have been, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. This is a person who gradually unveils for us that she was in a marriage that became an open marriage, which, shocker of the century, didn't quite work out because she basically fell for one of the guys she was screwing on the side. And now she's sort of like sitting in the pot shards and ash of her just ruined love life in late middle age, like trying to find somebody to commit to, and discovering that her prospects have rather decreased in number since she was like a young person among other young people trying to find love. So many of these things that she's complaining about, in fact, almost all of the things she's complaining about, seem to be direct consequences of following the advice in other New York Times pieces. Like, if you go back into the archives, you will find article after article recommending polyamory. Maybe you should give an open relationship a try, right? I mean, and men, why don't you go to therapy more? So this is a very, to me, just like chef's kiss kind of a piece, but it pairs interestingly, I think, with this other slightly more serious article by Jessica Gross called "The Boy Crisis is Overblown." Now, the framing is already contemptuous in the extreme. So it's not like this article is without its flaws. It sets up a total straw man about what the boy crisis is, that it's supposed to be exclusively about how boys don't do as well in school as girls. And her answer to this, in part, is, well, boys have never done as well in school as girls, which neglects the fact that that is a major part of the argument that people make when they talk about the boy crisis, that in fact public school education, modern education, post-Dewey education is in fact inherently kind of grading on boys in particular. More generally, though, it does seem like this is a newspaper-wide effort on the part of the Times to attribute Democrats' problems with men, both personally and politically, to anything other than the obvious fact that they have grievously mistreated and slandered men for many, many decades. I'm going to stop because this host introduction could very easily become a 20-minute long close reading of my favorite article of 2025 so far, "The Trouble with Dating Men." But I want to know what you guys made of all of this, and what some of your favorite, choicest moments were from these pieces.
Yeah, I just to give people a flavor of this, and so and I'm going to set it up with an old grad school joke of sorts, I suppose, which is that you come to discover, especially in the softer sciences in grad school, that a lot of what people are overpaying for in master's and PhD programs is they're not doing a lot of research really, or they are, but it's a very particular kind of research, which is colloquially and deridingly known as me-search. That is to say, they go and get a degree that indulges some passion of theirs or some part of their life that they need to sort through or whatever. And I think it's captured perfectly in the final of these 3 paragraphs, right sort of in the middle first third of this. And I this will be a little lengthy, but it really it captures the essence of the piece. So I thought it was
please. Read as much of this
a
article
dramatic
aloud
reading.
as you want. Can't wait.
I'm really done, my friend said. I can't keep doing this. I don't want to be hurt and misunderstood constantly. I need to find some other way to live. I agreed without thinking about it. This is part of the pessimism, right? The feeling that further thinking about all of this is futile. Surely we have done enough thinking by now. I wish I could just be gay with you, she said, and I wish that too. So much. This was our commiserative routine, what Saracen, some other academic she's already referenced, might call our performative disaffiliation with heterosexuality, our spin on take my wife, please, take my straightness, please, take my attraction to men. Is heterofatalism a useful concept? I took it up for a while, considered the positions. The writer and gender scholar Sarah Ahmed has advanced the idea of complaint as feminist pedagogy, arguing that to bitch is inherently transgressive, a form of resistance, while the philosophy professor Ellie Anderson suggests that women venting their dating woes constitutes a kind of negativity as rebellion. Was that what my friends and I were doing over dinner? Rebelling? If the experts say my romantic letdowns have some larger social significance, I'm not going to argue. The men I want are not wanting me badly enough, not communicating with me clearly enough, not devoting themselves to me. All this certainly seems calamitous enough to warrant an ism. And if it is an ism, the problem cannot be me. It must be men, right? Men are what is rotten in the state of straightness, and why shouldn't we have an all-inclusive byword for our various pessimisms about men? Domestic pessimism, they still do less of the housework and childcare. Partner violence pessimism, femicide is still gruesomely routine. Erotic pessimism, forgive me, listeners, the clitoris and its properties still elude many of them. And the petulantly proud masculinist subcultures that have arisen, at least in part, as reactions to these pessimisms, keep coughing up new reasons to fear, rage against, and complain about men. So that really encapsulates a lot of this. It's I encourage everyone to really slog through it. If you're not well acquainted with feminist academies, you get a nice introduction throughout this. And the wonderful thing is that it's interspersed with this woman's pathologies about her relationships and all of this personal detail, which at the end of which you just cannot do anything but conclude that she is mentally unwell. And modern feminist academics are not helping her understand herself, the men in her life, or any of that. Also, the other thing that struck me too was the extent to which this shows, if women are from Mars or women are from Venus and men are from Mars, the same applies sort of to Republicans and Democrats, or at least maybe big blue cities and the rest of the country. I mean, I just really don't think. I think this seems to me to be a very specific problem to San Francisco, Manhattan, and elsewhere. And if you plopped this down and forced normal Americans to read it, who otherwise would put this down after a few paragraphs and dismiss it as garbage, they would be kind of baffled. They would say, either this woman needs a better non-feminist therapist, or maybe she needs Jesus, or both. I don't know. It's just remarkable. It's a remarkable piece of writing, and it's a wonderful encapsulation of the way in which so much of the soft sciences on the left are elaborate coping mechanisms for the postmodern pathologies of the left, and self-justification and rationalization, all with all these ridiculous terms like what was the other one I brought up, Spencer? Hermeneutic labor.
Hermeneutic labor.
Yeah.
Which I wish I'd known about that in grad school. I could have gotten out of so many seminars.
It's part of the mankeeping, right? So for those who aren't up on these silly terms, really what she means is working to help understand herself and help her man understand himself. That's hermeneutic labor.
Wait. I think hermeneutic labor actually is something even funnier. Form a little bit of hermeneutic labor on the term hermeneutic labor, pitching us into an infinite mise en abîme from which we may never recover. Hermeneutic labor is emotional effort of deciphering the vague texts that your situationship sends you when you're not sure if they're into you, which is definitely a real thing that I'm sure anyone who's dated in modern life has experienced. But of course, the point of calling it labor is to basically imply that somehow the women should be due some form of compensation for doing this, which is I hesitate to even like engage with this concept. But for one thing, I reiterate that it was the authors of the New York Times who told men to talk like this. Like the whole premise of the piece is that these men are like offloading onto their supposed pathologies, like their anxiety or their desire for transparency or whatever other like sort of therapeutic category they've placed themselves into. They're using this as a shield to be awful, which is something that people do all the time now. They say, I'm doing a conscientious uncoupling from my friend. And what they really mean is I'm like cutting out my closest associate of 10 years because it's too much emotional labor to support them through like the death of their parents or whatever. And men in this woman's social circle have now started to do this because they were told again and again to go to therapy. And Ryan, you're absolutely right. Like those are the only men that are doing this, are like Wordle addicts in Brooklyn. All this woman has to do to solve this problem is date a conservative or literally anybody from not the five boroughs that she probably occupies. And she sort of hints at this when in one of the truly soaring moments of the article, which belongs in a museum, she speculates that, quote, in a Hobbesian state of nature, she might, quote, I think it's bow to the most beautiful penis. What she means by that is that she's one of these feminists who are always getting on TikTok to say, oh, this guy paid for like one drink and suddenly all my feminism threw out the window. Like she wants a guy who is going to, first of all, not obfuscate and deceitfully hide his feelings under this incredibly feminized therapeutic language. And second of all, who's going to act chivalric, right? Who's going to take her feelings into consideration, take the lead in the relationship, like know what he wants and go for it. All of which are things that if you're old enough to have lived through like 5 years ago or whenever, when we did Me Too, were drilled out of the men that she wants to date. So this really is just like a world's smallest violin situation, because if this is a bed that you didn't want to lie in, like maybe you shouldn't have devoted the paper of record to making it.
Yeah, it's like it's the feminist, it's the meme, the meme where the guy shoots the other guy and says, "Why did you do that?" It's like the feminist shooting the real men, real old school men, and then this is a long article version of why did you do this?
Yeah, why would misogynists do this? Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, this just reminds me of that Principal Skinner from The Simpsons meme, am I out of touch? And then, no, it's everyone else, it's the children who are wrong. I mean, it's like, okay, so this woman basically lived out exactly, the morality of the New York Times, what they've been saying since Me Too, Spencer. I think that's exactly right. And that's the central irony of this whole piece, the mankeeping piece, the boys piece, is this is the life that the New York Times have been telling women and men to live, for decades.
I don't want to interrupt you with yet more of my enthusiasm for the deliciousness of this article, but can I just note that she makes an extremely deceitful gesture at acknowledging that. When she quotes, I think, one of her friends saying, when did men stop just asserting themselves? It's when they learned they couldn't get drunk and grope us.
Right.
Extremely dishonest way to represent what happened during Me Too, right? It's not that they, like, men were told they couldn't rape people and suddenly they retreated like turtles into their shells. It's that they were told they couldn't even look askance at a woman without being in danger of a sexual harassment lawsuit.
Right. Like, I think of like the Gillette commercial where it's like a guy looks at a woman and then all of a sudden this other guy puts his arm right in front of him. Oh, you can't do that. I mean, that was the most dishonest. Actually, that's where I actually stopped laughing and actually got a little bit angry, because it's like, that is so incredibly dishonest. And I mean, all these pieces, I mean, I think of Bible verses sometimes, especially comes to mind. I mean, this one, Ecclesiastes 1:2, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. I mean, that just perfectly describes this whole kind of genre. It's solipsistic, narcissistic, somehow is like, buried under like all this language of just fourth-rate feminists. And it's just like, no, this is actually very simple. I mean, in a way, at the end of the day, it's like zero self-reflection. I mean, it's just pure narcissism, just hopped up as some like high, impregnable kind of language that, only the most, the smartest people can understand. And obviously those people are just like this woman who wrote this piece and others. It's amazing to me. Some of these lines too. I mean, this probably maybe was my favorite paragraph. This man and I met last fall when he was, like me, reeling from romantic rejection. Within a half hour, we lunged at each other as though by tacit agreement to be each other's comforting blankies for a time. We traded obsessive accounts of the failed relationships, cheered each other through the rigors of no contact, watched Albert Brooks movies, belted Weezer songs to karaoke tracks on his couch. I mean, like, that's actually real comedy. Like, this is stuff Colbert should actually be doing. But the problem for liberals is that's actually reality now. I mean, and there's nothing funny about it at all. All the humor has been totally taken away. But this is the life that they've essentially told themselves is of the highest intellectual pursuit. I mean, it's incredible. It's just watching, just the Hindenburg just go down in flames, over a period of, 30, 40, 50, 60 years on repeat. And it's just, this is the end result of modern liberalism. It's just, you have women who, I mean, are incapable of forming relationships. You have people incapable of seeing, human nature. I mean, there's one part where she says, maybe that's just being a man. That said, men's struggles to communicate in romantic relationships is widespread enough to have earned a psychological designation, normative male alexithymia, or the condition of being unable to put words to emotions. I mean, maybe that's something that just is, I don't know, ingrained in a part in men's nature. Like, that's kind of always seems to be something that, a generalization, of course, but something I think that is, certainly hinting at that something is very true. And in some ways, it's kind of sad because I think you're right, Spencer, and Ryan too, where you point out, look, they're clearly trying to actually get back to some semblance of recognizing nature, of actually recognizing something good, but it's just buried under just absolute mountains of just BS that, you just wonder if they're ever going to be able to claw through it. We'll see. I mean, I think she certainly needs Jesus. And I don't know how you
Oh,
get
yeah.
out of this. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't know how they get out of this. I mean, it's just like
Yeah.
the scene in Jurassic Park where one of the characters see this huge pile of dung and, just basically notes that. I don't know what you do with that. I mean, it's just so big. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, we should acknowledge too that we sort of have implicitly anyway. We just lay the blame at feminism. Oh, I mean, all these men in her life are defective in many ways. In the ancient times, Amelia dated my now wonderful wife dated in the San Francisco area. So
There you
when
go.
she read this, she said she was repeatedly triggered. She's like, "Oh yeah, there's all sorts of these men out there," and so
It's
I
a good point.
wonder.
It's just
Yeah, someone needs to. I mean, this would be a wonderful book actually, to kind of catalog this downside of feminism. I think it's probably been done, but you could have a lot of fun with it. The problem is to really do it well, you would have to wade through 50 years of this dreck coming out of the academy. But then you could have a lot of fun with all the terms and basically expose the whole thing for the charade that it is.
Yeah, you would
yeah.
almost need like even a Tom Wolfe kind of fictionalized account of this, something like, I'm Charlotte Simmons, but just, shifted a little bit to our times. But yeah, I mean, that is definitely needed.
Yeah, I will flag for everyone. I think I have in the past, but it's been months and months, if not years. If you all are interested in Tom Wolfe, read this good essay by Mike Anton in the Claremont Review of Books about his Tom Wolfe's Women, I think is the name of the piece, or it might be Wolfe's Women or the Women of Tom Wolfe. But Mike's point is that after reading Charlotte Simmons and a lot of Tom Wolfe's later stuff, one of his major themes is toxic femininity, basically. And it jumps off the page and Back to Blood, and also, but especially in I Am Charlotte Simmons. The real villain in that story is the girl. And in a way, the sad part of it is that it's not really her fault. She was made this way by this really toxic nurture environment that we've put ourselves in after a century or so of feminism and its various iterations.
All right. Dear listener, you've been very patient. It's time for big balls. We promised it. It's going to happen. 19-year-old man, part of Elon Musk's famous Doge initiative. Dead name Edward Korestein, I think is how you say it, but known to all his admirers and detractors as Big Balls, was assaulted
Because that we should add,
by.
that was his online handle at some point, right, Spencer?
That's right. Yes, this was some screen name he used at some point, and they dredged this up as if it were in some way damning or discrediting, because it was part of the really just catastrophically stupid news cycle in which the press tried to dig up dirt on these rather enterprising and, to me, quite promising young men who were the best thing to come out of the Doge initiative. It turned out was this like infusion of an entrepreneurial and initiative-taking kind of young blood into the government. And this story does seem to sort of confirm that impression of the Doge boys. Edward Korestein was assaulted by no less than 10, well, I guess approximately 10 is the news story, but a lot of, they're calling them juveniles. And we were saying before we started recording, this sort of sounds like language to avoid like hoods or street toughs in the older terminology, who assaulted this guy near DuPont Circle around 3 a.m. on Sunday. There's really shocking imagery of this kid beaten and bloodied, looking like he really took a nasty beating before the cops broke this up and arrested the criminals involved. Initial reporting, and by that I mean Elon Musk's tweets, seemed to suggest that this was a truly big ball moment. That Musk tweeted, "A gang of about a dozen young men tried to assault a woman in her car at night in D.C. A Doge team member saw that what was happening, ran to defend her, and was severely beaten to the point of concussion, but he saved her." Upon closer research, that does not seem to be exactly what has happened, but the press is using that fact to try and downplay the heroism of Big Balls, the charge of Big Balls. The Politico story that I read about this said something like, it was his significant other. They tried to steal his car and then they beat him up. The truth seems to be closer to the middle of those two things. The woman in question does seem to have been either his date or his girlfriend. We're not quite sure. They were in fact accosted by these juveniles who were talking about taking their car, and he's basically thwarted it, or talking about taking a car, I should say, not their car, but the New York Post reports he thwarted this carjacking attempt. At one point, according to the police report, for her safety, Korestein pushed his significant other into the vehicle and turned to deal with the subject. So this really was an act of chivalry and heroism, it seems, and it generated a bunch of press, including drawing the attention of Donald Trump, who has used this as an opportunity to advocate a number of different policies. Again, this is being sort of played as some sort of radical or reckless thing on Trump's part, but he says, perhaps it should have been done a long time ago. Then this incredible young man and so many others would not have had to go through the horrors of violent crime. But he thinks there should be a change in the law so that these kids could be charged as adults. But he also wants to bring, and you guys can correct me if I have the details of this wrong, but he seems to want to bring DC under federal control, and he's using this as an opportunity to talk about that as well, right? Which is kind of an interesting. Mike was not wrong that there are many angles to this story.
Yeah, so I think the federal control angle is really interesting because, I mean, Congress essentially, like, they retain ultimate control actually even after the Home Rule Act, which passed in DC in 1973. I mean, they still review all local laws. I guess there's like a 30 or 60-day window to disapprove them. They oversee the district's budget. They can override or block local policies at any time. But obviously with home rule, Congress, they did cede a portion of their authority to govern local city affairs to a city council. So that's made up of 13 members and there's a mayor. Prior to that, DC was actually run by a federally appointed group of commissioners. And, Washington, D.C. itself, like, it's a federal district. It's established in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, that grants Congress exclusive legislation, all cases whatsoever, over the seat of government. And so really all they need to do is repeal home rule. I mean, Mike Lee, actually in the Senate, he's introduced an act, the Bowser Act, named after the current mayor of DC. to do that. So to research, have Congress research lawmaking power of the nation's capital. And I mean, you look at the crime, you look at, especially in DC, I mean, especially when I lived there, it was like, okay, this block is great. This block right next to it, avoid at all costs. I mean, so it is a thing. It's known in DC. I would say over the past, 40, 50 years, the results of home rule have been pretty disastrous, at least for crime. So I would say, I mean, Trump does his usual thing. I mean, and I get why people are upset and whatever, but I mean, again, fundamentally, I mean, I think he has a great point. It's just as the nation, we should have borders. We should deter crime at all points possible. It should be the same thing in DC, especially in our nation's capital. He's doing this as the White House is building a huge new ballroom. And obviously, he wants the nation's capital to reflect, the grandeur of the White House and what's going on. So I think, that is just kind of a logical extension of that. It certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah, I will say that he's lucky. If you've ever taken any martial arts classes of any sort from a serious person, they will tell you the point of self-defense martial arts is to avoid fights at all costs because you never know what's going to happen. You could get hit, you trip, hit your head on a curb, and you're dead. Just chance in such things makes it very dangerous. And then if you do get in a fight, end it as quickly as possible. And that's a pretty tough proposition with multiple assailants, let alone 10-ish. So, I mean, thank God that the young man survived. I mean, the picture is shocking. He's pretty bloodied and got a concussion. It looks like he has a broken nose, but it could have been a lot worse. That's just the sad and sorry state of America that in large portions, and he was in DuPont Circle, a pretty tame part of DC, except maybe on the edges a little bit. But there are plenty of parts of DC where, it's basically, especially at that time of night, you would never go there. And so it's just a sad state of affairs that aren't the greatest nation in the world, the most powerful, hyperpower ever to exist, can't even police its own home federal capital district. That's sad commentary on the state of American cities.
Anecdotally, I got back to my house from the airport about an hour before recording this podcast. So I was just in a Lyft with this guy. Many of the Lyft drivers out here are Nashville natives. So they've lived here for many years longer than I have. And there's a real divide in this city, in this town, between the natives and the new arrivals, many of whom are kind of COVID refugees. And we try very hard to fit in with the culture of the place, but we're just never going to be anything other than like ex-Californians to some extent. And I'm sure Ryan, you have a similar experience in Texas. But I was kind of chatting with this guy, and he asked where I grew up, and I said, well, my family's from New York. I grew up in a bunch of places. And he goes, I went to New York once. And let me preface this by saying Nashville is a major city at this point. It's not crime free. There are areas of town you don't want to go through without some circumspection after dark. All of that is true. We've got homelessness. We've got crime. But this guy said, I went to New York once, and his tone was that with which you might say, I did a tour in Kabul. I've been to the third world. He said, I felt like I was taking my life in my hands getting on the subway. And the degree to which this guy just seemed appalled at this absolute state of blue cities. And it made me think it really is different. It's like a thing that is different in kind. And when you talk about this, Democrats will say, no, there's crime in every major city. And it's true to an extent. But having lived in both blue and red major cities, it's apples to oranges, a completely different beast. And this DC story is a classic example of that. Like, this is not the sort of thing that would happen in Nashville, that you would just be going to your car in a ostensibly nice part of town at any hour of the day, and you would be accosted by 10 kids that want to beat the living daylights out of you. And you're right, Ryan, he was lucky to get out of it alive. All right. Well, with that heroic story of big balls, let's do some recommendations. You guys have anything to commend? I should say, friend of the pod and sometime guest Scott Yenner, just to show my devotion to these recommendations, that I'm willing to back them up, texted me on I think it was Friday night. We were going back and forth about how to make the Too Soon cocktail that I
Nice.
recommended, and he had to school the bartender in making it, but his wife did approve. So you heard it here first. What do you guys have this week?
I've been watching. I should give a shout out because I need to give proper credit to where I first got turned on to it, which was Matt Continetti on the Commentary podcast. People hear me joke sometimes that I listen. I'm a fairly religious listener to the Commentary podcast, especially when they're talking trash about Claremont. But they were not doing that in this episode. But Matt recommended this show on Apple TV called The Studio, which is Seth Rogen's creation. It's basically it's a satirical send-up of the vapidity and moral cowardice and sort of shameless self-promotion and backstabbingness of Hollywood. And it's pretty funny. It's pretty well written. It's wonderfully cast, and it gives you a glimpse of a great blue city in the sense of, I mean, LA, whatever its faults, is a great city, and you see all the nice parts of it. You know, it's all Hollywood Hills. It's the studio lots. So it's eye candy, especially for former Angelinos like myself, or anyone who's a sort of a fan of the state. It's riotously funny for a certain
Oh my gosh.
sense
Great
of
show.
humor.
Yeah.
And we've been enjoying it quite a bit. It reminds me of the late Andrew Breitbart. He told me this in person, but then I found it actually in his book, Righteous Indignation. I think you can look it up. But he described Hollywood. The general game in Hollywood is everyone is trying to ascend to the top of the status pyramid, and they're all climbing all over one another to get there. And then his twist on it, given the nature of its sort of immorality, is that and their footholds and handholds are other people's orifices, which was his way of saying that everyone's sleeping their way up the mountain.
Yeah.
And that's sort of on display a little bit in this too. But go
It's
check
like
it
a
out. It's a lot
Michelangelo
of fun.
painting. Yeah. Not to put you on blast, Ryan, but I love that show. And on one of our American Mind planning calls, I asked if either of you guys had seen it, and you said you
Shoot.
hate Seth. You're too annoyed at Seth Rogen.
Well, so I need to
watch it.
retract my Continetti and give it back to Spencer. No,
Absolutely. Damn
Rogan.
straight.
The virtue of it is that Rogan is, I think, part of why the writing's effective is because he's sort of making fun of himself in some
Yes.
deep psychological sense. And they kind of all, the joke is that they all know that they're bad people in Hollywood, and it's a show about them being bad people.
So that's the bright side, and then David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. That's the other side, basically, of this same idea, just in a little bit different form. So, I went to the Toto concert, which was amazing. Christopher Cross played. He played Sailing. I mean, of course he did. Men at Work, Land Down Under. I mean, all the classics. You know, Toto played Rosanna. I mean, just Hold the Line. Everything that you would imagine. And it's just amazing. I mean, the guitarist Steve Lukather, like, he stopped even dyeing his hair now, like pure white. The talent is just amazing. The singer they have now, which actually was the singer on the late, so they did 2 albums, 1986, 1988. Joseph Williams, who's actually John Williams' son, was the singer on those albums, and he's back with the band. He's been back since I think 2010, and he sounds the same. They've got a great keyboardist, really young guy who sang really actually quite a bit of the high parts. He was incredibly talented. I mean, just everyone down the line, just really, really great show. There's a great venue out here in Cincinnati called Riverbend that if you haven't been, I would highly recommend it. It's right on the Ohio River, open air, you can really walk around a lot. So that was really, really good time, especially with 2 little ones. My wife and I have not gotten the chance recently to have a ton of dates. So it was just great to get out and do that. So if, Toto, anybody else from kind of that era is around, I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of probably some of the last times we'll be able to get to see a lot of these bands live in person. I would absolutely take that up and do it.
My gentle ribbing about Dad Rock, Mike, is really just cope for how jealous I am that you got to see Toto in concert. Okay, so our first subject this week was gerrymandering, named, as Mike mentioned, after Elbridge Thomas Gerry with a hard G. It has now softened into a soft G in gerrymandering. This is a phenomenon known linguistically as lenition, the technical term for what happens when a letter becomes softer for any number of reasons. But the classic example is that we have an English word maternal, which comes from the Latin mater, but we have the word mother, which has softened the T via lenition. The opposite of lenition is fortition, when you overpronounce a word. For instance, the town of Wharton becoming the last name of Quarton, much like Stewie saying whip in Cool Whip on Family Guy. And listeners, since this is not yet a video podcast, you can't see the look of riveted fascination with which my co-hosts are already staring, hanging on my every word. But it gets better, I promise, because gerrymandering is, as you may know, a classic example of what's called a portmanteau. It's a two words smashed together. The name Elbridge Gerry lenitioned into Gerry, combined with the word salamander, a word derived from Greek for the fire lizard, and that's what the salamander is, the sort of curvy serpentine creature, and that's what these districts look like. The word portmanteau, in turn, was coined by none other than Lewis Carroll in Alice Through the Looking Glass, where in her conversation with Humpty Dumpty, the egg explains to the girl, Humpty Dumpty explains that words in the poem The Jabberwocky, such as mimsy, are not actually nonsense words, but portmanteaus, combining things like miry and flimsy. So he says it's sort of like a portmanteau, which at the time was a very popular form of luggage, comprising two separate halves that were equally sized and opened up together. And so it's sort of like you shove these two words together and you put them in your portmanteau and you fold it up. The wonderful thing, very Lewis Carrollian thing about that is that portmanteau is itself a portmanteau. It comes from the French word for carry, pour, and for coat, manteau is the thing in which you carry your coats. This entire digression was really just a screening exercise, because if you got to the end of that without turning our podcast off or falling asleep, then and only then you might enjoy the book that I have to recommend to you, which to me is a true delight. It's called The Etymologicon, and it's by a kind of itinerant scholar, or as my friend Mary Harrington might say, a free-range nerd named Mark Forsyth. The subtitle is A Circular Scroll Through the Hidden Connections of the English Language, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. It starts with the etymology of the word book and leads you through about, I would say, 150 eminently readable pages that you can keep on your nightstand or even in the bathroom and read a couple etymologies at a time until it gets you all the way back from one etymology to the next, to the next, to the next, until it gets you all the way back to the etymology of the word book. And I won't spoil the etymology of the word book because it's actually one of the better English etymologies that he starts with. But these sorts of things are endlessly fun, and they're a great way to chase away unwanted conversation partners at cocktail parties. So the Etymologicon, A Circular Stroll Through the English Language. And with that, we will bid you farewell, and thank you all very much for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to know more about our work, you can follow us at theamericanmind.org, which is the website we edit collectively. And you can also read our sister publication, Claremont Review of Books, at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. You can check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. And you can donate to support this podcast and everything else we do at claremont.org/donate. We greatly appreciate any contribution you can make, large or small. And we would also really appreciate if you would follow and rate this podcast 5 stars and let people know about it. That bumps us up in the algorithm, which we must all serve. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, the brothers G, Jake, and Ryan Gannon, and thanks to you all, especially for listening. We will talk to you next week.